everybody dies. I mean, you're going to die. I'm going to die. All of our parents are going to die. Sometimes kids die before parents, which is a whole other level of tragedy. And it's like, if everybody's going to die, why does every time it happen hit you like a fucking Mack truck and send you into this decades-long spin out of grief? Literally happens every day, happens every minute, happens to everyone you know. And like, we cannot handle it. It is so painful.
My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too.
Happy week, all, or sad week, y'all, depending on how you're feeling. What's up? I'm Chelsea London Lloyd. I'm the host of Dying of Laughter. If you're new here, we interview comedians and wellness experts about the loss of their parents and siblings. If you're not new, thanks for coming back. I super appreciate it. And I hope you're having a good summertime McGee. Is it summertime? I guess. Half the year has gone by, which is fascinating. And people say that every month, every single month. It's like, I can't believe it's this month. And yet I'm going to continue to do that anyways. I just got back from St. Louis for my hosting gig. I had an incredible experience interviewing billionaires. What? Literally about their cryptocurrency experiences. And one of them was Paris Hilton. So that was pretty cool. Feel super groovy to chat with her and about her yacht choices. The company was called Yacht. That's a whole other podcast as to what that means exactly. But I had a good time. Back in LA and ready for this week's episode for you guys. I think you're going to love it. I'm so excited to have my friend Sabra May. We talked about things, despite having known her for a long time, we talked about things that I certainly didn't know about her. Sabra is an actress and a voiceover artist, originally from Portland, Oregon, and today we'll be talking about the loss of her father to heart disease. We also talk about what it's like to experience loss as an only child, how loss has affected her own parenting choices, now as a mom herself, alcoholism in her family, as well as growing up Chinese, indigenous, and white. I definitely recommend checking out her Instagram post where she opens up more about this. The photo on her Instagram where she's wearing a striped shirt and she's with her son. What a little cutie. All right, well, let's get into this. Sabra, thanks for being here. This was so much fun and sad and fun and sad and all the funs and sads. Also, since she's a voiceover artist, her audio is exceptional. So we love a sexy audio moment. Thanks for being here again, and I'll talk to you guys next week.
So my name, I go by Sabra May, but my full name, I don't know if you know this, is Sabra May Yi Choi, half Chinese. My parents divorced when I was 3, so yeah, my dad is from Hong Kong, my mom is white and Native American, and they met in college at University of Portland, and I was born in Portland, and they divorced when I was 3, always loved each other. It was a whole thing. And then my dad just was like a serious chain smoker, and he did not take great care of himself, and he passed away. This is a one thing. He was either 52 or 53 or 54 because whatever age he had to be on his passport to become a legal U.S. citizen is not necessarily the age that he truly was. And that is a thing we will never truly know.
Wow.
But he died of heart disease when I was 23. And I mostly grew up with my mom, but my dad was an aerospace engineer, and he was a contract worker. So he never worked for a company, right? He was an independent contractor like us actors. So he would bounce around a lot. So he worked in Seattle for Boeing, and he worked for McDonnell Douglas. He worked in Indonesia. He worked in LA. So he was like, sometimes he would be around for 6 months and sometimes he'd be gone for a year. Yeah, so he lived in our basement for a while.
Wait, after the divorce, he lived in the basement?
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
It was an interesting vibe happening in my house.
Thank you for sharing that about your experiences losing your dad. And I appreciate that you are just so candid with information. You're like, here's what happened. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about your experience having lost him at 23 and your feelings around that time versus how you feel now. Of course, grief changes and evolves. And I'd love to hear more about that evolution.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because there is your experience of grief, and then there's other people's interpretations of it. And sometimes those people tell you what you're experiencing, and you're like, wait, am I? What's happening? So my parents divorced when I was 3. I don't remember that. I was very young. They say, my family says, I didn't talk for a year, like that I stopped talking and didn't speak for a year and was traumatized by the divorce, which makes sense. A psychic who I have seen to talk to my dad, yes, I've done that, told me that that trauma was so big that my grandfather, who was my bestie, dying when I was 19, reactivated that feeling of abandonment. And then so did my dad's death on top of it, which is like, I mean, abandonment resonates as a feeling, right? So I don't know if that's exactly how it works or what happened, but like that is like an open wound. But I don't know if it's caused by divorce or the first death or the second death or what exactly. But when my dad died when I was 23, he'd been sick for a while. And I'm sure you know that is the thing. I don't have the experience of a parent dying quickly, but I have friends whose parents and sisters and everyone has died in some kind of car accident or some kind of freak accident where it's like they're there, they're healthy, and then the next second they're not. And that's crazy for them. For me, watching my dad deteriorate, watching his body change, watching him suffer, watching him go through this journey of deterioration was awful, right? It's just like this slow descent of my emotions, frankly, because he seemed more okay with it than me. And then another element there is that, the trauma runs deep with this one.
Please, that's what we're here for.
My mom is an alcoholic, so she has been drinking my whole life since before I was born. And so there's also that element of like deterioration and like me witnessing this like eventual tragedy, you know, and not knowing when it's going to hit and how do those two anticipations of grief affect each other? I don't know, but they're all happening. They're all happening at the same time. And I have no siblings. I'm an only child. So there was nobody there to be like, yeah, mom's drinking way too much. This is crazy. This is so scary. Oh my God, dad's sick. There's nobody there to like share in that experience. And even close friends who are like trying to understand, you know, it's a very specific family matrix that is only mine, you know. And then there's also the element of it's being like, we're in this very white place and he's very Chinese and that, you know, I don't know. There's like so many things that go into it that are only intimately known by me and the people that are in it. And he had his own addiction because he was smoking 2 packs of Marlboro Ultralight 100s a day after having a heart attack in Indonesia and then meditating. He tried to meditate until his heart attack went away. Yeah, and he came home, and my mom, who's a home health hospice nurse, was like, Richard, you're gray. What's happening? Like, your skin is gray. And they took him in, and then he had to have a 5 bypass heart surgery. And the doctor was like, stop smoking, stop eating Chinese food. And my dad was like, I'll do what I want, thanks. And continued to smoke and just, you know, live that life. But he was very smart and very well educated and not available for some emotions. And I was 23, so I had traveled around the world by myself at that point. I was living my theater life, just like doing 9 shows a year. And like you go to rehearsal and then you go to the bar and then you go home and then you go to rehearsal again. And there was a lot of drinking just in that age, you know, fresh college graduate. And I did a lot of drinking the year my dad died, I guess is what I'm saying.
Thank you for sharing that. And I resonate with what you're saying about the longer progression and seeing your dad deteriorate. I had, of course, a very different experience because we're all different, but I resonate and I did see that as well. Can you talk about what that was like? And I heard you say that you found it more difficult perhaps than he did. Like, what was your dad's reaction like at that time?
My dad was a very intense dude. I mean, he was a genius, some might say. Like, he invented things. He worked on spacecrafts and airplanes and missiles. And, you know, it's like the kind of thing TV shows are written about, right? He was working for NASA when the Challenger exploded. He was not part of that project. By the way, him and his team were like, then the Challenger's going to blow up. And they were like, no, it's not, bye. And then it did. So he just had, it's a whole thing. He has all of these emotions, and he was like the black sheep of his family. You know, his parents fought a lot in Hong Kong, and so he just did his homework, he studied, and that was the only way he could avoid them fighting. And then his brother was able to generate a lot of capital and get himself and my dad out to the US. And then my dad and mom met, and they're like, okay, well, the brother is the one who made the money, right? You didn't. Then you go and marry a white woman, and now she pays to send us out, right? My mom paid for the grandparents to come out. So my dad was always this like misfit in the family. And then after my mom and him got divorced, he went a little crazy. Like you can see it in pictures. His face is a little manic looking, and he never got a diagnosis, so I don't know. But he was very paranoid. He was very worried he was very superstitious. He was very concerned about supernatural things. And then after my mom divorced him, because, that was just not an energy we could have in our family, he was really mad. And he was like, I believe in God, but I'm mad at God. He like had a belief that there's this being who's deciding his fate, and it made him get divorced, and it made him be alone. And so he was never really comfortable on this earth. After the divorce, he was very upset and he was very bitter. And so I think when he got sick and when it became obvious that he was not going to live, even though he would speak optimistically, I think it was very clear to him that he wasn't made to be here, at least not for long. And I don't know, that kind of decision, it bothers me. Like it's like triggering to me. I'm annoyed by it. And also he wouldn't like hold space for me to have grief about him passing. Like I came down to visit him once. He lived down here in LA, but I was living in Portland. And his heart grew to the size of a football. And so his body was like tilted to the side, and he couldn't like walk properly, and you could hear him wheezing. It's like affecting him. And he's continuing to smoke, and I started to tear up, and he was like, baby, don't cry. Don't. Which is pretty upsetting for like, I don't know how old I was at that point, maybe 21 or 22. And he just like had resigned himself to being like, this is what's going to happen. Like I'm choosing it, almost like he was doing it, which is really selfish. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe everybody it gets to decide their own fate. But as the daughter of someone who's choosing that, it feels very selfish. Especially as like a child of an addict, where you're like, well, that kind of feels selfish too. I get that it's a disease, but it just felt like abandonment at every turn,
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that'll be really relatable to a lot of people in similar situations. So I'm curious at that time, like what did help, if there was something? Was there someone that you could talk to about this, or how was it processing at that time? Because that sounds difficult.
I could talk to friends. I had close friendships. I think at that age, a lot of us have very close friendships.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that they understood, like they would be there for me. And I mean, the night that my dad died, or the day my dad died, was opening night of a play where I had to go play a girl whose dad was dying and do a scene. The last scene of the whole show is me talking to my dying dad, which is crazy. And I got the call, and then I just fell to the floor sobbing. And then I was like, okay. And I called my best friend, and I was like, Camille, I got to get warmed up. I have to like stretch and do my vocal exercises and get to the theater. And she was like, okay, I'm coming over. And just like let me teach her my warm-ups, and then we did them together, and then she drove me to the theater. It was like, okay.
Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that you were in a play about your dad dying. I mean, the irony of that and like artistry woven into grief is so complicated as it is. Do you remember what it was like performing that night? Like, what was that experience like for you, and the rest of the weekend doing the plays as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was maybe the best scene I've ever done. So you're welcome, world. You're welcome. I was so there emotionally. Yeah, obviously I was. It was really crazy. It's one of those experiences you can't replicate exactly, because no matter how, no matter what you do, you can't do that exactly. But it was also a little bit, I mean, I got through it, but that kind of grief is uncontrollable in a way, and so it's hard to manage doing that and communicating the scene, like at what level can you put a cap on it so that you can get through? And you kind of can't. It's sort of like a waffling in between uncontrolled and controlled rather than being controlled grief. There's just no way to do that. But the scene went great. Obviously, I was a star. It was awful. And I was even telling the actor backstage who played my dad beforehand, because I hadn't told anyone yet, because I didn't want to, like, tank the show. You know what I mean? And he was just like, whoa, that's heavy. I was like, yeah, sorry? I don't know. Should I have not told you? Oh, great, curtains up. Let's go. And then afterwards, the director and the writer, it was a new work, were like, thank you so much for coming in and doing the show. And I was like, what was I going to do? I don't understand. Like if you're a theater person, there isn't an option to just not go to the show, right? Unless you broke your leg bigger than a fracture, right? You broke it enough, you actually had to go to the hospital. There's no not showing up to a sold out opening night. You go, right?
Yes.
You can't get somebody to cover you, not like 2 hours. You don't have an understudy. Like, what is this? Broadway? No.
I think this is fascinating. We were just when we were chatting right before this started, I mentioned, yes, my dad also died on opening night. So that's really crazy that we have that shared experience. Although my dad did not die in the play. So yours takes a whole new level, but I resonate. Like, people like, how did you do it? I'm like, what were you going to do? Let down an entire cast and crew and like all the months you spent prepping, just be like, sorry, bye. Like, no, I think the adrenaline and the momentum of having a place to be and somewhere to go is subconsciously fueling you. And to get that expression out, you're like, I have to go, I have to do it. So, hey, we did it, girl. We did it. What's up with that opening night Dead Dads Club? It's so random.
I mean, if I had one line as whatever, a flower girl in My Fair Lady or something, maybe I could have skipped that night, but you can't when you're like the person in the show. But it's interesting you say the Dead Dads Club thing, because that, I remember when I found out that you also had a dead dad. I was like, okay, and I say this is a stupid Grey's Anatomy quote, but it's not stupid. It's amazing. Somebody's dad dies, and Sandra Oh's character, Christina, is like, welcome to the club. Sorry you have to be in it. There's a few of us in here. We all get it. Fucking sucks. Welcome. And like, that's how I feel when I meet somebody else whose dad is dead. I'm like, welcome to the club. Sorry you got initiated, man.
Right.
Here to talk about it. All the snacks, all the meetings. Let's do it.
All the snacks, all the meetings, and yet there's like not snacks and meetings, really. So like, where are the snacks and meetings? Wait, okay. So Dead Dads Club has been a term going around for a while. Do you think it originally started with Grey's Anatomy? Is like that the scene that made this popular? Because I had not realized where it originally came from. Maybe it was that.
I never heard of it before that. That was a long time ago, at least 10 years ago. And I have said it to at least 25 women in LA whose dads are also dead. So that's all I know.
It might have been that. And it's like, the more people that come into it, the more that I find I can relate to other people as I get older. And yet sometimes I find resentment when people join it a little bit older. And I could say we were similar enough ages when our dads died. So we can talk about this. I mean, I was 19, we're the same world of young adultness. Sometimes when people are like a lot older and come in, of course I'm like, okay, come on in, let's talk about this. But I do find it's like a different experience. I'm like, you were 30, you were 40, you were 50, but it's like, it's interesting that there is just that common thread. You can just really relate regardless of the type of death or where you were in life or how old. And it is a different experience being young, because we have so much of our lives ahead of us.
Hopefully.
Oh God. Okay. Without our dads, so that's interesting.
But it's also like, one, props to everyone who lost their dad when they were like a child living at home, because there's a whole other wad of suckiness. I can't even imagine. Know some people. So sorry for them. But, everybody dies. I mean, you're going to die. I'm going to die. All of our parents are going to die. Sometimes kids die before parents, which is a whole other level of tragedy. And it's like, if everybody's going to die, why does every time it happen hit you like a fucking Mack truck and send you into this decades-long spin out of grief? Literally happens every day, happens every minute, happens to everyone you know. And like, we cannot handle it. It is so painful. And like, is there a road somewhere that is not that leads to us being okay with it? What does that look like? Do other cultures have this thing that we don't have, where somebody dies and they're like, oh yes, the sad yet inevitable thing that happens, and we can deal with it without losing our shit. What is that worldview? Because this one is really hurting.
That is beautifully said. And it's such an interesting point. I mean, I do think that other cultures, and not just think, I think and know other cultures revere death through a different lens. Other cultures, even that have more, insert word, respect, understanding, compassion for elders, let's say, that's more of an acceptance of anticipatory grief, right? Like, yes, in these cultures, your elders live with you, or more generations live together in one house. So you are seeing more of that gradual transition from life to death, even just subconsciously, if you have grandparents and aunts and uncles and great grandparents in your home. And American culture is not of that way. Like, we have a lot more care homes. Like, it's much more common that you would put someone in a care home than you and your family taking care of those people. And that's not right or wrong, and it's not about comparing, but it is interesting. I do think you would have a different experience anticipating grief and death if you even had grandparents in your home. Like, I never lived with my grandparents, and my grandparents also happened to all die, which is, before my dad dying interested me in all of these topics. You said that you were very close to your grandfather. You guys were besties. Can you talk a little bit more about losing him?
I mean, yes, but can I just talk about him instead? No.
Yes.
He was
Yeah.
so
Actually, yes.
amazing.
Also, wait, will you please? Yeah, I actually asked you, like, what was your grandfather and your father's names?
Oh, right. So my dad's name was Richard Tatsum Choi. So Tatsum means third son. So I think that before he came to America, he was just named Tatsum, like third son Choi, which is a common thing. I mean, people do that in a few different countries in the world. And then my grandpa's name was Howard Hughes, but he was not the Howard Hughes, and he did not pee in jars, and he cut his fingernails. So different Howard Hughes. And they were very different energies. Sometimes they didn't get along, but both of them loved my mom and loved my grandma very much. So that was like a sweet thing they had in common. But my grandpa was like this amazing, charismatic, dynamic star of every old people's establishment you can think of in the suburbs of Portland. Like, the people at Key Bank cried when he died. The people at Old Country Buffet cried. Like, he was a star in his church, everywhere. Him and Grandma were like, they were the power couple of, 1937 to 1999. But he was amazing. He was like a ladies' man. He had a cream convertible with red leather interior that he sold when he dropped out of med school to save $50 to marry Grandma. He just like paid off his college expenses, married Grandma. He drove trains like for Southern Pacific. He was an engineer, and then he became like an upper level management person at Southern Pacific. And he made jokes all the time, and he was just hilarious. And I mean, if I even showed you pictures, you'd be like, this guy is amazing.
Love him.
And he was my best friend. My dad was going through a manic period after I was born because my mom got really sick in the hospital. She had giardia from camping because they camped all the time. Go figure. And something else. What else was it? My mom had another health complication. So I was with her in the hospital for 2 days, and then she needed to stay, and I had to go. And so my grandparents took me because my dad was just so scared of my mom dying. He just couldn't handle it. And just like, my mom says he disappeared, but I think her memory might be mildly fractured from the alcohol and the trauma and the time. But at any rate, I spent the first few weeks of my life with my grandparents. And so we had a very close bond, and with no childcare. And when my dad was out of the country, my grandparents were the people who drove me to preschool every morning, and like they made a cardboard box crib for me with blankets and pillows in it. And they were my buddies. They were my nannies and my besties and everything. So yeah, I mean, my grandpa was very popular with everyone, not just me. And they called him Pops. But when he passed away, he had an aneurysm in his stomach. So his doctor had told him the week before he passed that he had an aneurysm in his stomach and that he should get a surgery if he planned to continue living. And he was 89, and he was like, I'll go when the good Lord decides to take me, and just never told any of us about it. And then like 6 days later, it burst, and he went into the hospital, and like, it was crazy too. I was 19, and I hadn't talked to them in a while, but I'd talked to my grandparents the night before it happened, or the night that it happened. and just was like, I love you. And we chatted. And then I got a phone call at 4 a.m. and I always turned my ringer off. I never have my ringer on when I'm sleeping. And that night I did. And I answered it and went immediately to the hospital. And it was such an emergency situation. He was like in a room off to the side of the waiting room. Like he didn't even make it into the full hospital area. And the chaplain came out and was just like, do you want to see him? Do you want to see your grandpa? Because this might be your only chance. And I was like, hell yeah. And I went in and my grandpa was on the table and his stomach was like bloated, right? Because it was filling with blood from an aneurysm. And he was saying, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die, which is not the coolest thing for his best friend granddaughter to hear. And I like held his hand for a minute and just told him I loved him. And that was kind of it. There were people everywhere. It was like a serious Grey's Anatomy situation. And I came out and my grandma was just in shock. She was just sitting there blank. She just couldn't even move because she had found him on the floor and then called 911. And I think she just was, she was literally in shock. And then the chaplain came out and I was like, do you think that he heard me? Do you think that he heard me? And she was like, I do. And I'm like, he didn't. He didn't make eye contact. The chaplain is lying to me. This bedside manner is ridiculous. Who do I write an email to? And also my grandpa is dead. It was like very intense. And there was so much grief with that for the whole family. Like we couldn't, at the funeral, we could only send up my uncle. He was the only person who could talk without crying. And he started to cry when he was giving the eulogy. It was so many things for so many people because they were the rock stars of the church, like that was, I'm not religious, but they were, and the church loved them and we all loved him. And it was traumatic for everyone.
I'm sorry, Sabra. That sucks. And I appreciate you sharing it. And The Rock Stars of the Church is your next movie and it's going to star old people. And
I mean, if the people at Albertsons cry when you pass, like you really made it. Those suburbs are yours, dog.
The rock stars of the church, semicolon. Those, what did you say? That was funny.
I don't know what I say.
You said those suburbs are yours, dog.
Yeah.
That's so funny. LOL, dying of laughter. It's not funny. But you've experienced a lot of grief, being that age with your grandfather who you're so close to, and then your dad, all before 25. I feel like it gives you such a different perspective on life than people who do lose people later in life. And like you said, we're all going to die. Why is it so difficult? I mean, I think it's, of course, one of the most difficult experiences we'll have on this earth. And I don't think preparing for it or talking about it more will make it less difficult, but I do think it could make it like 5 to 10% less shocking. Like,
sure.
Like the shock factor really interests me, right? Like,
yeah.
For instance, with my mom's breast cancer, it came back 17 years later and it was so fucking shocking. Like for a year of my life, I like blacked out of like a year of my life. That's exaggerated, but like it was so shocking and uncomfortable. This was just a handful of years ago. And yet part of my mission is just to normalize these things because her having breast cancer to begin with means that you do have a chance of it coming back. And it actually is less shocking than it seemed. And now I know more about it. But even as someone who was like very researched and up on illnesses from my dad's ALS and being in my 20s and already being interested in these grief topics here, hence I am doing this podcast, I was still shocked. Like the wind was knocked out of me. And it's like, why don't we know these things? 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer in their lifetime. Why are we so shocked when people we know get illnesses and diseases and cancer and heart disease? I mean, they're horrible things. Let's not like trivialize them, but why are we like losing our minds and being like, how could this happen? Because like you're saying, we all are going to die. It's not about being negative, but it's just like kind of silly that we're so crazed with that shocking news. I don't know. And maybe some people disagree with my point of view on that, but I just appreciate what you said about it because it resonated with me.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because it's like normalize that the disease is a thing that happens, but also don't normalize it because let's eliminate it. You know what I mean? So it's both things. Like we want it to be normalized so people feel free sharing it, know that it might happen, can be prepared. And also like, a lot of these things are preventable, or at least significantly delayable, and yet we don't take all of the steps to delay them. And like, where's the balance between I'm living my life, cheeseburgers and fries, and I don't know, cigarettes and booze maybe, and also like, I have a history of heart disease, I want to be there for my kids, or like, what are we feeding people that creates profit for someone that we all know is bad for everyone? Like, you know, just the tiny things, like, because I have a kid, right? So I'm so much more vigilant about what is in our house. And like the other day I was like, oh, I'm going to get rid of my Comet, you know, like my Comet scrubbing powder because it's toxic. I know it's toxic. I looked up the ingredients online. I was like, carcinogenic, endocrine disruptors, you know, like clearly stated. And I was like, but before I make this like baking soda, citric acid, soft scrub on my own DIY, I'm just going to finish using the bottle. Right? Because I paid the $2 for it. I'm just going to finish it. It's fine. I won't give my son the dishes from it. I'll wash the veggies in a bowl, not in the sink. And I'm scrubbing the sink and immediately splash an entire thing of Comet in my eyeballs. And I'm just like, how can I be upset that my dad is dying of heart disease and smoking cigarettes? How can I be upset? You know, like all of it. And I'm just like, physically pouring chemicals onto my body, being like, everything's fine, nobody's gonna die, everything's fine. Like, and I feel like the US does that with all kinds of products. We're just like, vaping is cool, that's fine, let's do that, you know, let's eat this, let's use that, let's pour even like perfume on our bodies, and then we're like, I wonder why I don't have a period anymore, or I wonder why maybe I'm having heart palpitations. And it's just, it seems too arduous to look into that, a source of any kind of longevity issues we could have.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's mind blowing. I mean, yeah, the chemical thing, that's like a whole other hour long conversation that I'm fascinated by that stuff. And I mean, the word balance comes to mind for a lot of these things. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, for instance, I personally don't wear perfume, like for these reasons. Like there's a lot of things I've eliminated from my life. And yet like I still have like Windex if something's like really dirty. Sure. Like I'm not gonna never buy Windex again, but like, can you buy like a third of your products clean? Can you eat salads a few days a week, if not daily? Like the word balance comes to mind. And yet I'm someone who I'm going to say both of us. I'm going to say like, we're different people, but like you're from Portland. I'm from the Bay Area. We're artists. We're in LA. We have access to resources and have friends who are healthy. We even have an awareness to have this conversation. Think about how many people have no idea what we're even talking about. Like Comet's bat. What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And whose job is it to educate all of these people? I mean,
there isn't one,
but like, can it be the government's? Like, what if we just didn't sell Comet? Then we wouldn't buy it. Like, I own it too, because it's there and it works the best. Like, what if they just gave us an alternative and then we could buy that? It's just so
it's just profits over people, right? All the time.
Complicated times. Also, are your eyeballs okay? That sounds terrifying.
I had blurry vision for a while, but it was okay. No, the rest of the day, but it was fine.
That is not fun. I'm worried about, oh my goodness. I'm so
I think it's fine. I didn't drink bleach. I think it's okay.
I mean, right. It happened once as opposed to like it happening every single day. But question. So did you get rid of the Comet? Is that Comet now gone?
It's in the trash. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I have a toddler, so I just have to be mildly more discerning than most. Let me ask you a crazy question.
Okay.
Looping all the way back to death.
I'm scared. What's it going to be?
Have you ever talked to a psychic to talk to your dead dad?
So funny that you asked, because I actually had a medium on 2 weeks ago on the podcast, and I was really like prepared and in my right brain to be like, I'm going to ask her all these things about what her experience is like talking to the dead. And like a few minutes into the interview, she was like, hold, stop. Okay, your dad's here. Okay, here's what he's saying. Okay, this is happening. So your dad says this. What's going on with the baseball cards? Just goes into all these things. And I was like, oh, wow. I didn't even like think about that as an option. So very recently, yes, is the short.
I cannot wait to listen to that episode. I am so excited.
Really interesting. Please tell me about your, not to put it back to you, but you know, this is about you, no big deal. What was your experience like with your medium? I know you said you talked to someone. How was that?
I did. I mean, I want to tell you, but can you just tell me, was it real? Was there a thing with baseball cards?
Yeah, he that was his obsession in life, and he traded them and like won like a worldwide thing about.
So you legit believe in your mind that she talked to him, he was there.
Look, I'm not woo-woo. I'm a little bit, so I'm woo. I don't know how all of these things work together. Am I a diehard, pun intended, spiritual person? Like, no, but I'm adjacent to it. I'm interested. I respect people that are. I want to learn more. I mean, she did say things that were pretty interesting. There was definitely some parallels. I think it's helpful to explore different options and to be open-minded, but I don't know, like where people go when they die. All of these things are things I'm really curious about. I look forward to having a more defined point of view about it, but I also feel like these things change and they evolve. And I had one point of view about a greater power after losing my dad, and some of that changed when my mom was diagnosed with a stage 4 illness. Like, some of my opinions on like what it all means got a little bit gray. I started to get frustrated. So it changes.
Yeah.
What about you? How was your experience, and what do you feel about?
Well, I had a couple things happen. So I talked to someone. She's like very well known for, I mean, she charges a lot of money,
Right.
And people pay it, and she's booked out 2 months in advance at least.
Right.
And she's revered as being very legit. And in my opinion, she was. I've always had a thing with some psychics where like there's information they're telling you that is like coming from somewhere, right? And then there's also their human opinion about things, and sometimes that is not asked for or accurate. So this is one of those instances. So first I was like, I want to talk to my dad. Oh, and I was like, and I want to heal my acne. Can you do that? She's like, yes.
Amazing.
Because I just had horrible like 6 acne my whole life, whatever. So I wanted both things taken care of. And she was like, yes, but do you have a grandmother? I was like, I do. She's like, what's her name? I was like, Edith. She's like, Edith is coming in strong. And I was like, oh, okay. So my grandpa's wife, my grandma, right? But the grandpa I referred to who passed away, she passed away many years later. She was 98. And like, she deteriorated. She was very old, right? But it wasn't, it wasn't like this tragic, sudden situation. It was a different thing. And so the psychic is saying, your grandma's saying you were right. You were right. And it's not so easy when you're the one in the driver's seat, which refers to me for like 6 years being like, Grandma, it is okay for you to go, because she had dementia. I'd be like, it is fine. You can come visit me if that's a thing you can figure out how to do. Like, you will be safe. Grandpa will be there. Like, we're here for you. You don't have to stay if you're uncomfortable in your body, right? And I would say that to her all of the time. And my husband would too, just to be like, safe space for you to go. If you need to go, you do it. Like, you don't seem super comfy right now, So that was what she was saying to me immediately. And I didn't tell the psychic anything about that. And so I was like, oh, okay, good. And she's like, and your grandma has her arm around your grandpa. And she says that it's lovely there. And we know that what they're saying, we know that your mom hasn't really figured out this life, but we want you to know we're looking out for her. And I was like, whoa, because I didn't tell her any of that either. So that was interesting. And then she talked to my dad, and yeah, I mean, nothing he said was particularly amazing, but it just so much sounded like him, which was like, he loves everything you're doing. He says to keep working and to be disciplined in your art. He likes to sit by the chair by the window where the light comes in, like very specific things. And it just gave me a lot of peace being like, he's not gone. He's not gone. He's not gone. Like he's around. And even if I can't have a relationship, he's having a relationship with me. And like, I can know that, as opposed to this, like, he's been ripped away from me forever and there's no reuniting,
I love that.
And then she lent an opinion about my mother's alcoholism that I felt was offensive and inaccurate.
Oh, okay. You're like, you were doing so great. We were having a good time in the rocking chair, kumbaya. And then you ruin that little moment.
Yeah, she implied that like my mom was a partier who maybe slutted it up on my dad. And I was like, whoa, so that's how you think alcoholics roll, because that's not how they all are. So
oh my gosh, I
cool.
know that's all.
It was weird.
I'm sorry that you said that. That's not helpful. There's so many other like rabbit holes we could go down. You do bring up alcoholism as obviously a whole other, I don't want to say beast because that implies a negative connotation. That's a whole other situation. And I wonder how your mother's doing now and how you were feeling about the alcoholism, which is another big thing that you've experienced. So what's coming to you around that?
We'll keep it mildly brief. I mean, you saw the one woman show I did when I was 8 months pregnant.
Oh my God.
Right?
Oh
Do you remember
my
that?
God. Of course I remember. It was like, it just was not on top of mind. And that was so incredible. I'm so glad you brought that up. That feels like a lifetime ago. That was so impressive that you did that. Please keep going. You are awesome.
So in that show, you may remember there's a monologue in the middle about my mom. And that monologue is sort of, I mean, I do stand-up comedy, but I also love storytelling. Like I love it more than a lot of things, including stand-up. But so that's a story about my mom and my mom's like journey to sobriety. And the thing is that a couple of months before that show, she relapsed while I was pregnant, which is, I mean, alcoholics rarely pick a very convenient time for the other people to relapse, but that was certainly not one for me. So that piece of the show was really interesting because the story was written when she was sober and then she was not. And I still had to, tell that story. So sometimes my mom is sober for a few months and sometimes she's on a bender for a few months or a few weeks straight, which is like every day, right? Like sometimes she's on a bender for every day for 8 weeks or like 90% of the days for 8 weeks or something like that. And it's rough. I mean, I was listening to a clip of one of your podcasts from the best of where this guy's talking about his mom and how he stopped talking to her, which I'm not going to do. That's not where I was going. But because there was this like pretend game he had to play when he spoke with his mom where everything's okay, but it's so not. And he just couldn't do that. It was a wrestle with him in his heart to be able to play that game or not play that game. And he's like, I can't, so I just can't speak to her. So it's kind of that way with my mom because there's so much shame involved, right? Like there's so much hiding about it. There's so much I'm not good enough and I drink, so I'm even worse, so I have to drink more because I'm terrible. That she just can't be upfront about it, and I'm like the opposite of that, probably because I was raised by that I'm like, okay, addiction is hard, man. Like, let's talk about it. Let's get into it or not, but let's like set up the system so that if you're gonna drink, that like your keys are not in this place or that everything you have is on the same floor so you don't fall down the stairs, which sounds logical to a sober person, right? But you're not like, hey, junkie, are you gonna shoot up? Let's get the mattress ready. We're gonna need some towels and a bucket. And no. That's not, I don't think they're preparing for them to have a relapse or have, a session. So there's part of it where she's pretending everything's okay and she just can't address the situation. And I just have to see that she's not sober and be like, okay, mama, love you, gotta go, I'm in a hurry. And do that every day until it's over, which is really painful. And, my husband I'm so lucky that I have him to be like a sibling in a way because there's no one to like know her and know what's happening and like be that close to the family unit to see that's what's going on. And then I don't have a dad there and I don't have my grandparents and I don't have anyone to just be like, this is fucked, sorry, and see all the nuances of it too. Because I do think when people hear that a parent is an addict or someone's an addict, they have this story of what that looks like, which I don't know. If I were an addict, it would probably be that story. It'd probably be like rock and roll and concerts and motorcycles or something. But no, my mom is like sad, missing the people in her life who have died, listening to classical music, drinking red wine. It's a different vibe. And people don't know that if they don't know addicts and they don't know you. So in a way, it feels very lonely. And it's also confusing. I mean, how do I present, oh, Nana can't answer the phone right now, sweetie. We can't talk to Nana for a few weeks. And now suddenly she's back and everything's cool and we can. Or like, why is mama crying in front of my own toddler, And it's just like, and I'll tell him those things when his brain is old enough to wrap themselves around it, But he's 3. So sometimes I just have to hold him tighter and get through it. And, my mom it's interesting that she's the only one that's left alive because she's the one who is like, maybe always had one foot on the other side that is like, she's so kind and such a martyr and has such a big heart and she's such a good spirit and is not great at being a human. And so I think it's just always going to be, I mean, she's 80 now. It's kind of always going to be like a little tricky for her. And I just have to love her hard and somehow self-protect as best I can, kind of alone. And that's it. Sucks. And also I'm grateful for her and I love her,
That's really well said. And I appreciate, the dichotomy that you're able to hold there. Like, it sucks and I'm doing my best and it's layered and it's not what you think. And I'm an only child, like all of these ands. And shout out to your husband and supportive partners who are able to like help one through. And I just appreciate you sharing this because I'm sure it's relatable to so many people. I mean, addiction is very, very common. It's another thing that is important to normalize or talk about and just have it out there. So I appreciate your point of view, and I'm sorry that that's what you are going through. And I appreciate your beautiful heart and how you see the world and are continuing that relationship with her, even though I'm sure it's very challenging.
You're very kind. Thank you. Love you.
Love you. Yeah, I love that we're also talking. We've like never had these conversations and we've known each other a long time, so this is a nice.
Yeah.
I mean, sad, nice, yeah, it's a whole thing. So I appreciate getting to learn more about you. And something else I wanted to ask you was about, I was really, really moved by your most recent Instagram post where you were talking about being white and indigenous and Chinese. And you mentioned growing up in a predominantly white space with your Chinese father. And I'm wondering what that looked like growing up in Portland and your most recent Instagram post, if you care to share that with listeners and what came up for you before writing that, because I think it's really important.
Okay, yeah. So I'm from Portland, Oregon, which is less white now, but as you probably know, is a very white place. Oregon was made as a state for white people. So that's what happened. And so I went to Sabin Elementary School from kindergarten to third grade, and that's it. Everything was normal. Everything seemed normal, right? I don't know if I say this in my post, but my first best friend was Brooke Chen, half Chinese also. My second best friend was Shalana Jackson. If you're out there, Shalana, I would love to find you. Miss you. And Shalana's black. And then I had and if you don't rate your best friends, then I don't know what kind of a childhood you had, but obviously I did. First best friend, second, third, fourth. My third and fourth best friends were white girls, lovely, beautiful white girls. And I don't know, I just had this normal existence. And then when I was switching between third grade to fourth grade, so 9 years old, right, just turned 9, my dad, Chinese dad, who was racist against black people, it's a thing, let's be honest. He wanted me to switch schools to a different school that was 8 blocks away called Alameda. I'm sure you're better now, Alameda. I hope so. And that school was very, very white. And it's also interesting he wanted me to switch schools because he didn't live with us. My parents were divorced. He was not present. So what say do you have in me switching schools, and why does my mom acquiesce to that? I don't want to do it. And that school had one popular black girl, one popular Asian girl, and I think everyone else was white. I mean, everyone else that was in my experience, at least in my few classes, homeroom, math class, whatever. And I made friends with the first girl who was nice to me because that seemed like the logical thing to do. And she was very unpopular, but I didn't really know popularity was a thing because I was 9 and I don't know, we just didn't really have that at my other school. And so everybody decided to shit on me too because they didn't love her, which had nothing to do with anything. And so because I was not all the way white, it turned into a race situation. And I have a weird name. My name is Sabra, right? So a substitute called me Sabra once. And all the boys laughed. And then they called me Small Bra. Then they realized I was the only girl with a bra in fourth grade because quick developer over here. And then they called me Sabra Hussein because the first Gulf War was happening and I was kind of not white. So they called me Sabra Hussein, which is really crappy. And people would chase me home from school screaming, "Go back to China where you came from," and calling me Ching Chong and Chink and all these things. And I'm I literally lived 3 blocks away from the school, never been to China, just so shitty, And somehow that unpopularity raged all the way through middle school and high school. It just kept going, even though maybe it wasn't about race always for every year after that, but it was a part of it. And then, growing up in a white place, it's dudes want to make out with you because you look exotic, because you look different. And when you're an actor and your face is your business, either you fit into some mold that they have or you don't. And there were no half mixed people on TV, right? There's Blackish and there's Mixedish. And now there's Ginny and Georgia, which love that show. That's now. That's 2021, right? When did Blackish come out? 3 years ago? 4 years ago? Yes. There are not mixed people on TV. right? Like there are mixed kids on commercials with interracial parents. There are no mixed grown-ups. There's no like space for me. I get cast as ethnically ambiguous young business person, like McDonald's commercial, Intel, like those kinds of things. There's no call for like a person who is Chinese and Native American and white, right? And it's just this thing that always follows you around. And in voice work, I can be any of those things or none of those things. And that career is thriving. And I have been doing that for less time, and with less training. And I book those jobs many times a week. And how many times do I get an on-camera job? Not ever if you have to explain where I came from. I could be a teacher or a manager or something, but if you put me in a family unit, you got to explain it all. And it just doesn't happen that often. So there's a lot of trauma. I don't know what to say. Being like, even now, if somebody is like, shut up, freak. If I hear the word freak, I'm like emotionally triggered because that's what people would call me because I was a freak because I'm like half Chinese. I'm like, dude, I still like 90210. You know what I mean? I love Luke Perry. I still listen to Boys to Men. Like, we're the same. I love Mariah Carey. I'm not weird. Stop it. I'm not a freak. That was my kid voice talking, by the way. I don't currently listen to a lot of Mariah, but a little. So that was just an experience that I don't think people think of when they think of AAPI hate or whatever. Because like a mixed kids experience is different in all realms, right? Like kids at school who were black and kids at school who were white never got shit on as much as the kid who was half black and half white, And I don't know exactly why that is, but it's something that people don't talk about that affects a lot of people.
Yeah.
And go watch Ginny and Georgia because they talk about it. It's cool.
I actually haven't seen yet. I've heard really, really good things. So thank you for mentioning it again. I appreciate you sharing this and how you're saying, like, I don't know what to say. Like sometimes I feel like these stories just need to be told and there's not this perfect solution. The solution is sharing and being honest. And what you're saying about being mixed specifically is really, really important. And I'm so sorry that you have that experience. It's so unacceptable, and bullying in general is unacceptable, but then specifically related to race at that age, it's like there needs to be more training for teachers, and slowly now it's like, let's do that. And if we talked about these things earlier on, it would just do us a world of good, because kids pick up on anything that's different, right? So when you're saying mixed kids specifically are getting, they're being like, okay, that's the one person that, let's say, doesn't look like these other 5 people, and they're going to say something. Right. The fact that carried through middle school and high school is really disappointing and frustrating, because 8-year-olds are one thing, but like teenagers saying that's so fucked up. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but they're the same 8-year-olds. They're just teens now. Like, I'm from Portland, right? There's only a few schools. It's not that big. It's like, what is it, 1 million people now? There's 750,000 people. It's not, wow. It's all the same school trajectory, right? So, I mean, I went to school like that. I think that's why I had to leave Portland for a decade or so, is because I can't run into Tommy from kindergarten's mom at the grocery store every day. Like, you just need some space from that. And unless everything went well for you, in which case maybe all of those people are reminders of like the wonderful experience you had. But for me, it wasn't, And yeah, I mean, I think that's another reason, oddly, that I'm so into TV, because TV is accessible to so many people of so many different backgrounds, economically, racially, culturally. And so if that is normalized on TV, it reaches people in a way that writing books about it can't, or having, NPR shows about it can't, But if it's like Ginny and Georgia's on Netflix, right? People are going to watch that, and there's a mixed Asian kid on it and a mixed black girl on it, and they talk about it and they compare their experiences as well.
Wow.
And obviously, even those experiences are not indicative of everyone's experiences, right? But it's an exposure that we haven't seen before, right? And so I think that's why it's so important that writers are on top of this, and that producers are. I mean, who is it? The producer of Blackish, Mixedish? She pitched a show about her own Hapa upbringing. She's half Asian, and it got shot down. After the success of her show of Blackish, she pitched a like half Hapa show, and it got.
Wait, who is? No. Wait, the showrunner of Blackish is Kenny Bears, who's a man. Who is the?
I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. I'm not going to look it up while we're on podcast. That's crazy. I'm not going to stop and look at my phone.
We can't do 2 things at once. Who do we think we are? No. Okay, but someone high up and fancy on Blackish.
So at any rate, that's why we need to get this out in a way that people can see it. And that's the internet and TV. And I think that's our job as artists. And sometimes I think people think that the goal of being an actor or being in Hollywood is like shallow and shitty. And I can see how some people might think that, but it's actually hard, deep, emotional work. And a lot of people in this business have a serious message and a serious mission regarding inclusivity, regarding mental health, regarding abuse. And these are stories that we're attempting to bring out into the world to help change it, you know? And I think that's a far cry from people thinking Hollywood is just lip injections, you know, and like people trying to be a star.
I'm really, really glad that you just said that, because like you're saying, television is so accessible to so many people. So these missions of inclusivity really can reach in a way that an intellectual forum would not, like NPR or even books, which is horrible to say, you know, it's like more people watch TV than read books. I mean, that's a generalization. Certainly that's not everyone's experience, but like, yeah, TV, seeing the people that are being described and hearing about their experiences is a hugely influential opportunity to make change. And we are seeing that slowly, but it just feels like, God, how are we it's exhausting that we're like have this small amount of progress each year. But my point being, I appreciated your Instagram post. I thought it was really illuminating. It was good to hear how you felt about that. And I remember something you said to me many years ago. You said, you know, your last name legally is Choi and you go by Sabra May. And I remember you saying how you were going into commercial auditions and things, and they would see Choi and bring you in for a certain thing. And then you didn't look, let's say, Asian enough in their perspective. And so it was frustrating for you and you changed it to May. Is that true? Like,
yeah. So, okay, first of all, Choi, like the Chinese spelling of Choi would probably be CHOY, but whatever, whenever my family came over and somehow it got translated to CHOI, that's the second most common Korean last name, right? First is Kim and then it's Choi with an I. So people see my name, assume I'm Korean, which is one thing. Because even if I was a fully Asian person who walked into a room, I would not be a Korean woman, right? Maybe I could, I don't know, pass or something. But so there's that. And then also it's just like you see that last name and you expect to see a certain person, right? And you see that name on your roster, you're having a commercial for Asian women and all of these Asian women show up and then I show up with my like, I don't know, different kind of look. I'm mixed, you know. I think I look more native, even though percentage-wise I'm more Chinese, which I hate even saying because I have strong feelings about blood quantums, which we can talk about later. But, you know, and May, like my middle name, May Yi, that is a Chinese name. But May is just, it doesn't, you know, it has no affiliation, right? It can be whatever. And so I go by that because then people aren't expecting me to be something that doesn't fit their spec. You know, they have specs. It's if you read whatever, or you read a description of a character, it'll be like Karen, 30, white, you know, Sue, 35, Asian. Nobody's like ethnically ambiguous unless probably it's a commercial call. And even that is kind of annoying because I'm not ambiguous. I'm pretty specific, right?
My goodness. It's just like, what a fascinating world. And like, it just like makes my head hurt, but in a good way. Is that the right thing? I mean, not in a good way, but I'm just like, how can we get to a place where this is not such an issue all the time? The only thing that makes sense to me at all about this is like when people say TV, you don't have time to explain all these things. It just has to be what you see. But my counter to that is, well, why don't we write stories like the Netflix show you're talking about, where it is explained? And if it's in the writing that it's explained, then you do have time. And if it's not in the writing, then you're right, you don't. It's like, this girl's a cheerleader, so she needs to look like one. Unless the storyline is like, she tried her whole life to cheer and couldn't because this, and this is what her mom said. Like, you're right. Unless we explain it, we just need to see it. So I think the key is writing more stories where it is explained.
But I mean, people are writing stories. Does that mean they're getting produced or funded? You know, and that's the thing is I think that obviously profits over people is terrible. But to work within that system, you just have to make shit profitable, right? Monetize it. Like, have you looked at commercials since BLM? got a lot more color in them now, don't they? Because they monetized it, right? It's just like Costco carrying a bunch of organic stuff. They just figured out they could make money. They didn't suddenly start caring about pesticides, right? You just monetize it. If people are going to buy stories about real people who are mixed, stories about people with mental disabilities, people with like depression, if that's what people are going to buy, then people are going to make it. But like they have to figure out that it's profitable, and then they will jump through every hoop imaginable to make that be the story that's told.
Of course it's profitable because that's what people look like and people want to see themselves. So to me, I'm like, hello, of course it's profitable. Like ding, ding, ding. Like, why are we even saying this? But I feel like the problem is a lot of people need to see that it's profitable first. So it's like, it takes a lot of work for that first X, Y, or Z show, podcast, whatever it is to get made. And then once that thing's made, what's cool, but frustrating is like, the prototype is this. The prototype is Blackish, but it probably took Blackish a bajillion zillion years to get out there. So how can we just get people to take more risks off the bat without needing those numbers and the proof first? I think with social media and like all this access to internet, things like that have done like, look, we need numbers, we need stats to back it up, or we're not even going to go there. And I think it's really important as a business to, yes, a lot of your products need to have proof. Like McDonald's is going to make burgers that they know people will buy. And can we once, twice, a quarter, a year, take a chance on something new? Because that's the only way you're going to try. Because a lot of these things don't have the prototype and it's exhausting to try and force it in there.
I mean, we could make YouTube content. I mean, but again, it's like, why do we have to do it? You know what I mean? Why are we the ones that have to make this all on our own? But it, like Broad City was a YouTube show and it got picked up. If the YouTube shows that were making all of the money or whatever, the TikTok channels, and those were stories about people who are mixed, then maybe that would be some kind of data that could be used to eventually make a show that we're all talking about.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think it goes back to, taking a chance and having creative people and people in power being confident in their creative vision, or if they're more on the business side, in their business vision, and knowing, you know what? I feel really good about this showrunner. I feel good about this actor. I feel good about this storyteller. And no, it has not been done before. But yes, I have integrity and I have taste and I am going to move forward with it. And I think a lot of people are scared to fail and make those decisions. And that is generalizing. I'm sure there's a lot of wonderful people who do advocate for these stories and they don't get greenlit. Sure. That's like, I think it trickles down. That's what I try to do. And even in my like little baby projects and things that I make, I hire a lot of people that I've worked with before and I know they're going to be good. And that's just how it goes because I don't have a lot of time, energy, or money and I need it to happen. But I always make sure to cast and crew to choose a few people that I haven't worked with before and that I don't have any letters of rec about, because I believe in taking chances. And you know what? If it didn't work out, it didn't work out. But that's one or two of the 20, even like with podcast guests, I have sometimes people I've never met before, because if I just use who I know, like I'm not growing and the world's not growing. So I think we can all just take a little bit more of a chance,
Cheers, cheers, cheers.
I don't know if I'll like keep that all in there, but do you know what I mean? Like, don't you think that's a small thing we can all do? It's just, we can all.
It is, but it's also about transfer of wealth then, right? Because the people who are executive producers are the people who have the money, right? That's their job. And they're the people who get to make final calls and final decisions. And if those people are all white, straight men, then it's just a certain set of decisions that's going to be different if it's all gay Black women. You know what I mean? But like the finances are not there for people of color to have the same positions as other people, right? And so like what if we had a project where a photographer was just like, I'm taking pictures of all the writer rooms for the best shows on TV. And then we just saw the pictures of the people in the writer's room sitting at a desk. Like, what would that look like? And who are the people hiring them? And who are the people that are funding that project? And it's like, if 99% of the wealth in the world is going to straight white men, then what can we say?
It's really frustrating. Okay. That's not to end on like the most negative, sad note ever. But I wonder, is there one thing that you would like to say that you you would suggest that people can do, that white people can do. It is not up to you to give advice or make these decisions.
That white people can do. Oh, interesting.
It's not up to you to have that, but I also wanted to give you the
Sure.
floor if there's something that comes to mind.
Well, I mean, think about like the 15% pledge. You know what that is, right? Like a store pledges that 15% of their products will be from African American producers or companies or something, right? What if you had a percentage pledge? I know it's kind of affirmative action, but a percentage pledge for talent pool, you know, for whoever, for the projects that are crossing your desk. Like if you produce 3 scripts a year, like what if at least one of those scripts featured a lead who was just not white, a straight white male? Maybe it's a straight white female. Maybe it's a alter-abled straight white female. Maybe it's a gay, you know, like just a little, just something a little bit, right? And obviously we have the quirky Asian best friend. That's a trope. But we can start to look at all of the things in our lives. It doesn't have to be just stores that carry products. It can be the products on your own shelf. It can be the projects you choose to produce. It can be, you know, the music you listen to. It can be anything. Just start to widen your perspective a little bit. And then as far as a personal request to people in social situations, I think, like I said in my Instagram post, just like veto casual Asian racism or casual any kind of racism from your conversation, right? It might not be okay to say something racist about a Black person in most conversations, at least I hope at this point in your life. And if it's not, you have issues to address. But is it that way when you think of Indian people or Vietnamese people or Chinese people or Filipino people? You know, like, do you hear people say things like, yeah, but Asian guys just aren't that hot? You know what I mean? Or like, oh yeah, but you know, they have all the Indian telemarketers answering the phone, so you'll never get anything done. You know, like little, simple, casual things that people say that nobody addresses and they just let slide, or they give like an uncomfortable chuckle. Like, no, address it. Address it. Why do you think that? Is that really your experience? How do you think that makes that person feel? Do you really feel that way? Did the media teach you to feel that way? Just question those little things with people you don't want to do it with. That's your job.
Absolutely true. And it's so important. And I think that's a good, well, it's not a good, I don't know how I'm going to end this, but thank you for sharing.
I'm sorry. Did I give you the most depressing episode ever?
No, it's so important. I was so intrigued all the way through. And one last thing is I normally ask people this at the beginning of the episode. So in an abbreviated version, we made it. I asked people about their goldfish moment, and their goldfish moment is the first time you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. For some people, it was their goldfish. Is there a moment that comes to mind?
Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
Her name was Nosy. She was a black and white cat. My friends found her camping, and then they gave her to us. She liked to eat spaghetti and chase birds on the TV screen, and then she got hit by a car. And my mom told me after she picked me up from school, and we just leaned on my mom's car and cried in front of the football field. And then that was it.
I'm laughing because it was so specific and cute.
You said be brief.
That was so succinct and like just, oh, poor little Nosy. And so you remember like at that time being sad, and that was one of your first grief experiences. That's a cute first grief experience. I don't know if that's like appropriate to say, but that's a cute one.
Thanks. I mean, I do sometimes wonder if there's an afterlife, just so I can go and like talk to my old pets and be like, hey, do you remember that time you climbed the tree and you couldn't get down? Oh my God, it was crazy. I love you. You know?
That is hilarious. I love that so much. What were your like childhood pets' name?
I had Nosy, and then I had Cutie. Please remember I was like 6 years old when I'm naming pets, right? And then I had a series of hamsters, which I'm not sure I want to encounter in the afterlife because I'm not sure I was as good as I could have been. And I think their descendants are living in my mom's basement. Ew.
Oh my gosh. Wait, they're still there? Like she never got rid of them?
We can have a whole other episode about hoarding some other time.
Okay, great. Some other time. Like in a year, we'll like do a part 2 and I will ask. Love Nosy and Cutie. Adorable. My cats were named Whiskers and Sassy. And I also named and then I named my dog Diamond because dogs are a man's best friend and diamonds are a girl's best friend. So I wanted my dog to be everybody's best friend. And wow,
I'm dying.
What a metaphor.
That is so cute. Yeah, I love how diplomatic you are. Thank you for bringing everyone together.
It was very diplomatic and yet obnoxious. Somehow Diamond is still like an obnoxious name, but like love you, Diamond. If we ever meet again, let's chat. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Sabra, sharing these stories about your father, your grandfather, and all of the other things that we talked about. I really appreciated getting to hear from you. And I feel like I've known you such a long time and I didn't even know these things about you. So thank you for podcast bringing us together.
Bloopers, 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 bloopers.
Since it was a long time ago, or, you know, what is a long time? Yeah. What is time? What is time? What day is it? Okay. But anyways, sometimes when I find someone who's a fit for the podcast, I'm like, yay, you're a fit. Would love to. Oh, actually, I mean, I'm very sorry. How are you doing? This is horrible. But like, yes, please come on. So
welcome to the podcast. And sorry you're here.
We can schedule you. Let's do it. It's like, oh, that's actually very sad. Yodo, you only die once.